Well, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. And today, I want to continue with our seventh message on the Sermon on the Mount series and pick up where we left off in chapter 5, verse 23 and following. So if you have a Bible, you can grab that. Now we come to some difficult words. Okay, we come to Yeshua's words on adultery, lust, and divorce. And let's just say that this is not one of my favorite topics to give a sermon about. I mean, I don't mind talking about it. It's life. But I don't like to give a sermon about it. So I apologize in advance if this is awkward. But you know what? Such is life. And so occasionally, not so often here, but occasionally we need to talk about these things so that we can really understand what Yeshua and what the Torah is talking about. So, when we do a message at camp, we have this seminar that we call it the awkward talk, and it's all about dating and all this stuff, the awkward talk. So, anyway, let it be the awkward talk. And let me just frame this discussion by saying that Judaism has an overwhelmingly positive attitude towards marriage and towards sex within marriage. Okay, that's the framework that Judaism has. The first words that God speaks to humanity, to Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve, are be fruitful and multiply. Now, a tradition in Judaism sees Adam, as actually one person who is both male and female, containing both. Adam means human. And then God separates and fashions part of Adam into Chava, Eve. Chava is life. So the man, Ish, and the woman, Isha, are really two halves of a whole human. And they are then told to come together to become one flesh once again. And it is called very good. Now, this act of Adam and Chava, two halves joining together, is called in Judaism Kiddushin. Kiddushin means marriage. And the Hebrew root of this word comes from holy. Holy in Judaism means to be set apart for God. So marriage in Judaism is set, and in the Torah, is set apart for God. This marital union, Kiddushin, is so holy that it carries with it the potential to partner with God in the most holy of tasks, to create a new human life, a new eternal person who is also made in the image of God. This is why the new woman is called Chava, life. She is the crown of God's creation, and she is called very good. This idea needs to frame Yeshua's words that we're about to read in Matthew 5. So we are in Matthew 5. Yeshua is continuing with his theme of teaching Torah from the inside out. He just discussed how it applies to the sixth commandment, do not murder, from Exodus 20:16 and Deuteronomy 5. And now he continues with the seventh commandment in verse 27. You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I tell you that everyone who looks upon a woman to lust after her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. And if your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It's better for you that one part of your body should be destroyed than that your whole body be thrown into Gehenna. And if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It's better for you that one part of your body should be destroyed than that your whole body be thrown into Gehenna. Difficult words, are they not? So let's begin first by defining adultery according to the Torah. The Hebrew word is na'af, and it means to act unfaithfully or treacherously. It's used to refer to Israel's idolatrous relationships with other gods, the worship of other gods and the prophets. In the Ten Commandments, it means being unfaithful to Kiddushin, the marital union that we just talked about that was set apart and made holy in Bereshit, in Genesis. The value of a marriage covenant in the Torah is highlighted by the severity of adultery. In Leviticus 20:10, we see if a man commits adultery, na'af, with his wife of his neighbor, with the wife of his neighbor, both the man and the woman shall be put to death. Now, these words sound harsh to me and harsh to us, and I think they should. Context is important. First, the Torah actually reflects a dramatic pro-woman change from the ancient world. Notice that the man and woman are both held liable for adulterous actions. That wasn't seen in the time of the Torah or even in the time of Rome. An example of how the Torah protected women in a hostile patriarchal society. And that's really what's going on here. Second, it isn't clear how often this sentence was actually carried out. We have a lot of biblical examples where it was not carried out. By the first century, Jews were not executing people for adultery. And the early rabbinic writings in the Mishnah, in those writings, we find that the rabbis go to great lengths to make sure that there are so many rigorous legal proceedings around this commandment that it's virtually impossible to execute someone for it. In our culture, adultery is usually seen as only infidelity to a marriage contract. If a person is not joined by promise to another person, they can do whatever they want with whomever they want, as long as it's consensual. In our society, that's the framework. Consensual is the key. And that's important. Violating a promise or a contract is viewed as the highest ethical demand. And this is the rationale behind same-sex marriage today. Marriage is understood simply as a promise of fidelity between two people. So why shouldn't anyone enter into this covenant, a contract of covenant, a commitment, and love? Why not? In the Torah, this is not kiddushin. This is not marriage in the Torah. In the Torah, the sexual union between a man and woman itself is what initiates and then consummates a marriage covenant. So, biblically, marriage is defined by a man and a woman becoming one flesh. It's a different definition. For example, the halakhic reason that premarital sex is prohibited in traditional Judaism is that sexual relations actually creates a marriage. This creates all kinds of problems where there's no formal ketubah, there's no formal marriage covenant, and then any future marriages with other partners becomes adulterous because no formal divorce can be given according to the Torah of Moses. In addition to defining marriage this way, the Torah places a number of restrictions on what is a permissible union, some of which rarely get talked about. The Torah has stipulations about who can remarry after divorce, and when that's okay and when it's not. There are unique qualifications for marriage between the Kohanim, between the priests. Relations are not permitted between family members. Relations are not permitted between members of the same sex. And even within a marriage, Torah has a category called nidah, which means separation, which places restrictions on times when relations are permitted or not within the context of a marriage. Now, I want to qualify this. The Torah does not consider the nature of attraction. It wasn't a concept that the Torah fleshes out. It's not a sin, and this is how we understand it, to experience same-sex attraction, just as it's not a sin to experience sibling attraction or attraction to anyone who is not permitted to you for one reason or another. The Torah deals only with actions and with defining the institution of marriage. The point here is to define adultery. In the Torah, adultery is any kind of sexual act outside of a permitted marriage. And in Rabbinic Judaism, later in Talmud, in Tractate Sanhedrin, it understands adultery to mean any kind of sexual immorality that Jewish law prohibits. Of course, we see many people in the Torah fall short of these restrictions, and we get, especially here at Ruach, we get that we live in a broken world. We get that life is often very difficult, and we, in our community, tilt toward understanding each other's weaknesses. We tilt toward loving each other no matter what and focusing on helping each other grow along the way. Nevertheless, Torah reveals what it means to be a covenanted people in this vulnerable and deeply personal area of life. The Torah brings order to chaos in a broken world and adds holiness to what is most vulnerable and most sacred, the most sacred area of life itself, the act of creating a new person made in the divine image. If God is inviting us to partner with Him to make life, we must strive to live within the limits that God has set, lest we take life into our own hands, thus becoming our own gods. To violate this is to reject our Creator. This is the context for Yeshua's next words. You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery, yet I tell you that everyone who looks upon a woman to lust after her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Now, we've been calling Yeshua's teaching Torah from the inside out. Sexual immorality is set in motion by meditation on adulterous desires within a person's heart. Now, while there's some evidence that Galilean Jews were actually more strict when it came to sexual purity laws and customs than the Pharisees and the Judean elite in the first century, later rabbinic tradition tends to follow Yeshua's school, actually in a lot of areas. In the Talmud tractate on Nidah, separation, we find the evil inclination says to a person, do this sin. When the person obeys his inclination, the following day the evil inclination will say, do that sin. And then the following day, go and worship idols, and he will go and worship idols. One sin leads to another, and ultimately we're left forsaking the Lord in idolatry. Now, contemporary brain science agrees with Yeshua and the rabbis in a way. So neuroscience tells us that visualization and imagination actually stimulates the brain and even reinforces the same neural pathways as the actual act. This was first studied monitoring a person's brain while learning to play the piano. It's a fascinating study. The brain responds the same way when the person was thinking about playing notes without moving their hand than when they were practicing it with their hand. It was the same neural pathways that were being created. Another example, imagine right now that you have a lemon before you. Bring the lemon up to your nose and smell the lemon. Now, visualize taking a bite of that lemon. Can you start to salivate a little bit? Yeah, so what's happening there, tons of neurochemistry and physiology is happening to make that real. The same neurochemical reactions happening in your body, imagining the lemon as if you actually had it in front of you. So when a person visualizes or imagines sexual acts, it stimulates the same neurochemistry as the act itself. And then this creates and reinforces neural pathways, creating highly stimulative associations with the imagined persons and actions. A brain will over time become dependent and then gradually addicted to this neurochemistry, this mix of endorphins like dopamine and oxytocin and a whole soup of others. In order to get the needed rush of dopamine, the brain then takes the fastest and easiest route. So what may have seemed like a harmless fantasy begins to change the biochemistry of the brain and actually shape you into a different person. When this happens in the context of a marriage, or for those of you who are single and perhaps in view of a future marriage, it compromises the sanctity and the holiness and the set-apartness of that covenant marriage relationship. Those neural pathways that are intended to create and to reinforce new neural pathways and a deep emotional bond with your spouse become attached to others. For some, a harem of nameless fabrications, or the imaginations of people who are in real life forbidden to you. Now, this is interesting. The Greek translation of the Torah that Matthew used in the first century uses the same term that's in the Ten Commandments for do not covet that Matthew uses for lust or desire in our passage. So Yeshua seems to be bringing together the seventh commandment about adultery and the 10th commandment about coveting together. You have heard it said that you shall not commit adultery, yet I tell you that everyone who looks upon a woman and covets her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. I think this is helpful for us because Yeshua is not saying that experiencing attraction to a person you are not married to is adultery. And nor is he saying that a man appreciating a beautiful woman or a woman admiring positive qualities of a man is a sin. This is information. The key is what we do with it. Attraction should move to appreciation for God's creative genius and then move on. In the context of a marriage where you're permitted, you can linger in appreciation, and that builds all kinds of healthy neural pathways. But in the context of a relationship that is not permitted in the Torah, the key is not to linger, and within a moment to move on in life. Lustful coveting is conceived in the gray area between appreciation and lingering in your mind. This is where temptation is nurtured and adultery is birthed. Jacob's letter, also known as James, says this well in 1:15. A person is tempted when he is dragged away and enticed by his own desire. Again, it's the same word for covet. Then when desire or coveting has been conceived, it gives birth to sin, and when sin is full growth, it brings forth death. King David noticed Bathsheba bathing on the rooftop. He noticed that she was beautiful and attractive. That wasn't his sin. He should have simply left the rooftop. His sin conceived when he lingered, then coveted her in his heart. That seed germinated into action, and he brought her into his bedroom. Not only did this sin of coveting lead to explicit adultery, it also led to murder. It led to the death of their son. Coveting is the desire to possess something which belongs to someone else or is forbidden for you to have. In his book on the Sermon on the Mount, Rabbi Resnick quotes Darrell Bach. To lust after someone dehumanizes that person and turns that person into an object of self-indulgence. On the one hand, lust seems to like the most personal and inward of transgression, he says. What's the big deal? Who is it hurting? Who will really know anyway? But the opposite is really true. A person's sexuality is holy, set apart, sacred. It's designed for and protected by the covenantal relationship that marriage is intended to provide, a covenant between a man and a woman and their Creator. This is the framework required to participate in the privilege of partnering with God to create new life and raise healthy children. Coveting a human being who is not permitted to you by formal covenant of marriage turns that person into an object or even into property with one function: to serve yourself and to gratify your own desires. Bach writes, even lust, which seems like the most personal and inward of sins, affects those around us and diminishes the image of God in our own fellow human beings. We can see this reality in our lust-addicted culture and the havoc it wreaks, not just in the minds of the lustful, but also in the actual lives of many today, particularly children and women. Even when this is understood to be consensual, it still dehumanizes and violates the divine image of God in the other. It becomes a relationship that is fueled by hedonism, self-indulgence, and gratification. We might call it love in our society, but all we have to do is look around at the destruction left in its wake to see that love is a far cry from the true sacrificial love our Messiah has invited us into when we step into life in the kingdom of heaven. We have exchanged true love for its imposture. And the ones who are hurt the most are the most vulnerable, our children, and worse, I'll say the millions of children torn from Chava's womb, robbed of their own life simply because they were not wanted, and though conceived, not treasured. It would be incomplete if we discussed lust and adultery without a brief word about pornography. Did you know that the porn industry is estimated to be a $100 billion global industry? $13 billion in the U.S. Access to pornography has dramatically increased with technology. Young people are especially becoming more and more entrapped in its snares and addicted. First, the sex slave industry promotes a lie that we need to say. The lie is that women involved are consenting and want to do this. That is ignorant. We heard from the organization we support here at Ruach, a mirror house that fights trafficking, that even in New England is one of the largest sex trafficking hubs in America. Some of these girls are kidnapped from other countries. Others have been sold into the industry by struggling families. And here, in America, professional groomers find young girls who are vulnerable and over many months coax them into leaving their home to be trafficked in the porn industry. Raina recently went to a fundraiser for an organization that fights trafficking, and there was a person who shared a story, I think by video, a recording, whose parents died. She was lonely. She met a guy who was a professional groomer who was pretending to be someone who would encourage her and help her. He offered her a job, paid for her expenses. She came into a house and was forced into a room with a camera and forced to perform. And I don't know exactly how long that was for, but she was eventually rescued by this organization, and many were not. And it's a mind game. It's manipulation. There's all kinds of things that happen in that world. And let's say perhaps some women do this by choice, but really it's only because they have been so abused and wounded in life that they feel they no longer have any value and they can't see another way, and it becomes a prison. The pornography industry feeds on the sin of coveting and adultery. I say that to watch it is abuse. Using a treasured, sacred, and uniquely loved human being who is fearfully and wonderfully made for one's fleeting satisfaction of a dopamine rush. Just like Yeshua emphasizes when we spoke about murder, the real solution is recognizing the divine image in each other. Those people on the screen or whatever, they're children of the great King, made in his image, destined for his glory. In God's design, sexual desire is holy, and it's good. It's designed to make marriage unique, set apart, beautiful for his purposes, to create a lifelong holy bond between a husband and wife in order to create a safe home for children. Anything beyond this is a contortion of the evil one. Our last verses are difficult, but hopeful, and I'll close with these. And if your right eye causes you to stumble, gorge it out and throw it away. It's better that one part of your body should be destroyed than that your whole body be thrown into Gehenna. And the same if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It's better for one part to be destroyed than your whole body go into Gehenna. Yeshua's teaching is not unfamiliar to the later rabbis of Rabbinic Judaism. We find in the Talmud a discussion about whether the hand that would cause adultery must be cut off. One rabbinic voice says, it's better that his body be destroyed than he descends into the pit of destruction. Sounds very similar. Now, I don't believe that Yeshua or the rabbis are being literal. I don't believe that they're meaning cut off your hand literally. Yeshua is using hyperbole. But it's a very strong hyperbole intended to focus on how critical it is that we master our temptations and our desires, lest we will not be equipped to share life in the kingdom of heaven. That's his message. I think that Yeshua's words are hopeful, especially for a person who's caught up in sexual addiction, which is a very real thing and a very difficult thing, and we understand. In the words of Rabbi Russ Resnick, according to Yeshua, inner infidelity is not inevitable, but results from actions of the eye and the hand that can reverse if we're willing to pay the price. Can we deny that today's visual bombardment of sexual imagery fuels adultery of the heart? Tearing out the eye today means turning off the television, blocking those websites, or closing the book or magazine ruthlessly if necessary. He continues, film in particular often employs explicit sexual images in the context that is otherwise artistically compelling. But Messiah's standards require us to forgo experiences that may have a positive side for the sake of wholeness before God. Back to neuroscience, the good news is that God created our brains to be neuroplastic. Those neural pathways that become addictions can be rewired, just as in Yeshua, even the most egregious of our sins can be forgiven and washed clean. And we live out of that truth here at Ruach Israel. But it must become as though there is no other option. A person must be willing to take these steps, like Job did in Job 31. I have made a covenant with my eyes, he says, to keep covenant relationships sacred and set apart for the Lord. I'll close with a beautiful word in the Jerusalem Talmud from Berachot 1:5. Commenting on do not commit adultery, Rabbi Levi says, It is written in Proverbs 23:26, "My son, give me your heart. Your eyes should watch my ways." The Holy One, praise to him, says, "If you give me your heart and your eyes, then I will know that you are mine." Again, I rarely talk about this topic in sermons. The reason is that people can become hyper-focused, as if it were the worst sin rather than one of many that we struggle with. And I think we can be tempted to ignore the complexity of human desires, of the human condition, human weakness, and addictions that are very common in our broken world today. And really, I think that the real solution to this is not a list of don'ts, but instead it's to live Torah from the inside out. A covenanted life of integrity where we see ourselves and we see each other through the eyes of heaven. And we understand that the limits that God puts on us are part of his plan to help us live kingdom of heaven kind of lives with our hearts and with our eyes on him. Shabbat shalom, everyone.